This presentation is all about the self-report research method in psychology. So self-report is the collective term for interviews and questionnaires. So basically it's asking people questions to find things out. One of the issues, of course, is asking the right questions, and questions are surprisingly difficult to write. Usually you know what you mean, but the person you're asking the question might not. And that's one of the reasons that we need a pilot study to check that our questions are easy to understand. Self-reports have issues, and one of the main issues, of course, is that people don't necessarily tell the truth. But they are very efficient and reliable, and they're very ethical because people give consent to answer questions and they don't have to answer your questions if they don't want to. So what's the difference between a questionnaire and an interview? A questionnaire is written, so you give people a list of your questions and a pen and they write them down. And an interview is a face-to-face conversation. Problems with both interviews and questionnaires is their lack of validity. Basically, your participants might lie to you. Now, in psychological terms, we might talk about social desirability bias, where participants give answers that they think make them look good, or demand characteristics. The participants give the answers they think fit the researcher's aims. So let's have a look at questionnaires first of all. Now, with questionnaires, we need to think about the types of questions we're going to ask. Now, one type is open questions. Open questions allow people to elaborate on their answers and to give more detail, and they generate qualitative data, but this means they're much more difficult to analyse. It's open questions we tend to use a lot more in interviews as well. For an example, for a study on people's belief about the paranormal, we might ask the question, can you describe to me the most paranormal activity you've ever encountered in your life? And obviously that would generate qualitative data. A more familiar type of question on a questionnaire probably is a closed question. So these are questions where participants are given options, so they have to choose one. So again, our paranormal questionnaire, do you believe in? Please circle any that apply. Ghosts, vampires, the devil, demons, nothing. And of course they generate quantitative data, which is really easy to analyse, but it doesn't give us any detail. So we don't know, for example, why someone believes in nothing or why someone believes in ghosts. A further type of closed question is a Likert scale. I'm sure you've seen these before. They assess the strength of someone's opinion on a topic. So it's usually strongly agree, strongly disagree, and somewhere in the middle. Now, Likert scaling always has to be an odd number, so often 1 to 5. And the reason it has to be an odd number is so that you've got that not sure one in the middle. Of course, the problem is that people do tend to opt for the middle values rather than either end. So in this example, do you believe in the paranormal? Strongly believe, not sure, don't believe, or strongly don't believe. People would be much more likely to go for the 1 or -1, the believe or don't believe option, rather than the strongly ones. Similar to a Likert scale is a psychometric scale. Psychometric scales, though, are usually on a scale of 1 to 10. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how afraid are you of ghosts? 1, not at all, 10, terrified. But again, people don't tend to go for the extreme values of 1 or 10. So again, you've got a middle bias problem. The final type of questions we can have in a questionnaire are contingent questions. And these questions depend on the answer to the preceding question. So for example, do you believe in ghosts? If yes, go to question 3. If no, go to question 5. There are some pitfalls to avoid when writing questions. So first of all, overuse of jargon. For example, do you know anyone that is protanopic? All that means is colourblind, hence the little picture on the side. And for any of you that maybe are colourblind, the number in there is 57. Emotive language that links to leading questions. Do you approve of the oppressive uniform policy of this school? Using the word oppressive makes people want to say, no, I don't agree with it. And leading questions. Now that you know how bad smoking is for you, will you give up? Emotive language leading questions, they lead to much more demand characteristics, obviously. Double-barreled questions are something to be avoided. What is the fastest and cheapest way to get to London from here? That question is not one that can probably be answered because the fastest probably isn't the cheapest and the cheapest probably isn't the fastest. So it's not an answerable question. And finally, avoid double negatives. Would you agree that Kim Kardashian is not unattractive? Obviously, the correct question there would be, do you think Kim Kardashian is attractive? Pilot studies are really important in self-report, whether you're doing questionnaires or interviews. They're basically a trial run, which are designed to highlight any problems with the question. What's really important though, it's no good just doing a pilot study with a small amount of participants to see what happens. You need to then analyse the data. What are the issues with your questionnaire or your interview schedule? What do you need to change? How can you improve it? So what are the strengths and weaknesses of questionnaires? One of the major strengths is they're very reliable, they're easy to replicate, and we can gather lots of data really quickly. As many questionnaires as we can get out there and get back is as much data as we can get. They're very ethical because people consent, they don't have to answer the questions. And closed questions generate quantitative data and are very easy to analyse. You can get lots of graphs and charts and work out your descriptive statistics, etc. The problems though, as we've said before, one of the major issues with self-report is lack of validity. Participants might lie, and we've already talked about demand characteristics and social desirability. It's also surprisingly difficult to write questions which are not leading or unclear, and you definitely need a pilot study to check that out. Interviews then. These are face-to-face conversations between the researcher and the participant. They usually contain more open questions, so generate qualitative data. So interviews can be structured, and structured basically as an oral questionnaire. You're reading your questionnaire out to participants, but you've got the opportunity to explain to them anything that's unclear. And semi-structured is when the researcher has a basic outline of questions, but they can deviate from this if the participant starts to say anything really interesting. So the strengths then, interviews tend to generate qualitative data, which is in-depth and detailed. Semi-structured interviews can lead to serendipitous findings. Now the definition of serendipitous is happy accident. So things that maybe you hadn't even thought of, one of your participants brings up, which could be really insightful in the research process. Interviews tend to have more validity than questionnaires because there's a rapport or a relationship that develops between the researcher and the interviewee. And of course, the other issue is that the interviewer can explain the questions, which makes your data a lot more valid. Weaknesses then? Researcher bias. This is a real issue in interviews and can be a result of what the researcher says or their body language and their general manner. All of these can make participants open up more or less to them. Demand characteristics and social desirability, just as in questionnaires, are still an issue. And of course, because it generates mainly qualitative data, interviews are really difficult to analyse. I hope you found this presentation useful. What I would suggest you do now is have a look at past paper questions that have been asked on self-report and read the relevant chapter in your textbook. Thank you for listening.